hopefully the audio will arrive soon. But Sarah Buna Benor is a really, really smart and talented teacher. And for those of you who have not learned with Sarah Buna Benor before, there's so much to learn. She's written books. One of them just came out, and I hope that you'll give it some plug, and we'll put some links in the chat for those who would like to check out your book on Jewish camp and how Hebrew manifests at Jewish camp. But you've been teaching on a variety of interrelated topics on basically Jewish sociolinguistics. Is that a good way to sort of encapsulate the class you've been teaching? You've been talking about Jewish languages, Jewish names, and
yeah, that's right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good.
You're here. If you're able to move slightly closer in your chair, that might be good, but where you're clear, it's just a little distant. But so Sarah Buna Benor is a professor of linguistics, of Jewish studies, of Jewish linguistics at HUC, at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. I'm not going to give too much more intro because I'm really excited to just continue learning from you. You've been giving classes weekly over the past six weeks, seven,
yeah,
six.
Six.
And this, you initially weren't going to do one for Shavuot, but I really wanted there to just be a cherry on top. I wanted there to be a nice culminating moment because I so thoroughly enjoyed what you brought. And here we are. So thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure to have you as always.
Great. Thank you so much for organizing this, Lex and Dan, and for everyone who has been here around the clock or who's just joining right now. And I'm really happy to be here giving this lecture for Shavuot. And I want to share my screen so that you can see some slides and see some videos. And my talk today is going to be moderated by my friend Ron Hart, who is a writer for TV in Hollywood and who is also relevant to our topic for today because he is a non-Jew who is part of a Jewish family. He married a Jewish woman and is raising two wonderful Jewish children. So today I'm going to be talking about how non-Jews use Jewish language. And the title is Pastrami, Verklempt, and Chutzpah, non-Jews' use of Jewish language in the United States. I'm going to give the first word to President Barack Obama, who gave an award to many people, including Barbra Streisand. And I'm going to play that part of the award ceremony.
Hello, everyone. Of the stage, screen, and song. Born in Brooklyn to a middle-class Jewish family. I didn't know you were Jewish, Barbara. Barbra Streisand attended her first Broadway show at age 14 and remembers thinking, I could go up on that stage and play any role without any trouble at all. That's what's called chutzpah. And it helps when you've got amazing talent, all of which made her a global sensation, one whose voice has been described as liquid diamonds, and whose fans have considered bronzing her used coffee cups. She has sold more albums in America than any woman in history. She has collected just about every honor and award that there is. I couldn't believe she hadn't gotten this one. Off the stage, she's been a passionate advocate for issues like heart disease and women's equality. I'm getting all verklempt just thinking about it.
Okay, so that is Barack Obama, and you could see that he used a number of Yiddish words. He said chutzpah without the ch sound, right? And he said verklempt without the T at the end, or glottalizing that T. And so you see, this is an example of a non-Jew using Yiddish words in speech directed toward Jews, and also using those words with changes in meaning and pronunciation. We talked about the pronunciation, but the meaning change is the word chutzpah in Yiddish means, it has a negative connotation. The gall of that person, the chutzpah. But he used it in a very complimentary way, as the chutzpah is a positive thing. So this is not a lone phenomenon, but Obama is not the only one to do this. In fact, it's quite common. And non-Jews in the United States use Jewish language in many contexts, especially in speaking and writing to or about Jews. Often these words are marked as foreign or funny. Sometimes they're mocking, but sometimes they also use them in their own language without reference to Jews, sometimes with changed meanings. And this use of language reflects the range of relationships that Jews and non-Jews have with each other, from respect to romance, from humor to hatred. I'm going to explain how all this works. Here's my outline. I'm going to start by talking about some historical correlates in other parts of the world. Then I'll talk about modes of diffusion of these Yiddish and Hebrew words. And then I'll give you examples from several domains, from foods and products, social networks, pop culture, politicians, white nationalists, and Jew-adjacent non-Jews. You ready? Okay, here we go. So first, a note about terminology. I'm using the term non-Jews. Now, some people are concerned about the use of this term and feel that it's an othering term. It's like saying there are Jews and everyone else. And that's true. I need an inclusive term because I can't say Christians or Muslims or Hindus because the term non-Jews is inclusive of all of them. Other options for this inclusive term are either offensive, like Goyim, or archaic, like Gentiles, although Gentiles does seem to be making kind of a comeback lately. So I'm going to be using the term non-Jews. Also, I should point out that the boundary between Jews and non-Jews is porous. In fact, this model doesn't really work, the idea that there are Jews and non-Jews, because the boundaries are really porous. And in fact, it's more appropriate to talk about a center-periphery model, where we think about the Jews who are the most Jewishly engaged in the center and other Jews outside of that. And then you have this ambiguous category of Jew-adjacent non-Jews or part Jewish Jews who don't identify as Jewish or non-Jewish, but part Jewish. People who have Jewish ancestry but don't consider themselves Jewish, or people who don't have Jewish ancestry, did not convert to Judaism, but declare themselves to be Jews for some reason or another. And then we have non-Jews who have some Jewish connection, and then non-Jews with no Jewish connection. So I see this model as a more accurate reflection of what's actually going on in the world. And in fact, when I ask on surveys about whether people consider themselves Jewish, that question often gets many responses in the other category. No matter how many options I give, on surveys I've given 4 options and 9 options, but still many people want to explain their Jewish connections or their Jewishness in ways that are not easily categorizable. So when we're talking about non-Jews' use of Jewish language in the United States, there are many historical correlates around the world. Of course, Shavuot gives us a great opportunity for such an example, although we're not talking about a Jew-adjacent non-Jew here, but rather an Israelite-adjacent non-Israelite. Ruth obviously stays with her mother-in-law, even when she was not originally part of this community after her husband dies. In Egypt, in the 19th and 20th centuries, Jews were heavily involved in the goldsmith industry, and the Muslim and Christian goldsmiths learned a lot of jargon from them that includes a lot of Hebrew words that were originally used as secretive language, like ganeb, meaning thief, and Einaimak, meaning look out, from the word Einaim. And so this secret jargon started out as a Jewish secret jargon, but became a goldsmith's secret jargon and is still used to this day, even though there are very few Jews left in Egypt. We see the same in Germany and Switzerland and other countries in that region, where cattle trading was dominated by Jews in the 19th and early 20th centuries. And they did the same kind of thing. They came up with this Hebrew-influenced jargon, including words like yom, meaning day, and ushpis, meaning pub, from ushpis from Aramaic. And in the mid-20th century, Jews were no longer there because of the Holocaust, and the non-Jews who remained as part of the cattle trading industry continued to use these words. We also see this today in non-Jewish involvement in klezmer music in the Netherlands, as in this band Die Goyim, and in other parts of Europe, and also in non-Jews who are involved in Jewish tourism in Poland. All of these groups use elements of Jewish language in very interesting ways. So now we turn to America. And we find that Hebrew and Yiddish words are diffused beyond the Jewish community into the broader American population in three primary ways: social networks, media and popular culture, and commodification. When I say social networks, I don't mean Facebook. I mean people interacting with each other, which used to be in person. So this can include Yiddish immigrants speaking to English-speaking Jews, perhaps their children and their friends, and doing so in English with Yiddish words. And from this bilingual interaction, we find that the English-speaking Jews pick up these words and use them in conversations with non-Jews, and the Yiddish speakers might as well. And this is how some words can transfer from community to community. But then you have the additional influence of media and pop culture and commodified products that lead to the influence of additional words. So I'm going to show you how all of these work and give you data about all of them. So first, commodification. What I mean by commodification is things that are sold. So this is especially common for foods. And you see here some examples of signs and advertisements for foods that Jews introduced to the United States: kishka, matzah, and pastrami. Yes, pastrami was influenced by Yiddish-speaking Jews. The word is from Romanian, and there's some debate about its origin. It might involve Turkish and many other languages. But anyway, the Romanian word pastrami, pastrame, became part of Yiddish. And then from Yiddish-speaking Jews, it became part of Jewish English, and then the broader English-speaking population in New York, and spread all around the country, including to Los Angeles. This is a sign from Boyle Heights, from Jim's Burgers that sells Mexican food, tacos, pastrami, and charbroiled burgers. And of course, this continues today, where you see this not only in the names of the foods, like bagels and pastrami, but also in a whole deli and bagel shop culture of using Yiddish words. You can see some of those in these signs here, and Hebrew words as well. And you get this in other products like Hebrew, the chosen beer, that uses Yiddish words like l'chaim and schmaltz, and this fake Hebrew lettering that's actually English letters made to look like Hebrew letters. And you also get commodification of the Yiddish language itself in various products, in t-shirts and mugs, and even refrigerator magnets. And of course, you have books that might be involved in the spread of Yiddish words. When Leo Rosten's The Joys of Yiddish came out in 1968, I think it had some influence on the use of certain Yiddish words. Certainly his definition of chutzpah being when a person kills his parents and then pleads for mercy from the court because he's an orphan. That's his example of chutzpah. And that became widely cited, not just among Jews, but among other people who use and define the word chutzpah. And this continues today, where Yiddish is commodified to sell TV shows. So, like you can see in this ad for Curb Your Enthusiasm, which has Oi as the mouth of the main character in that show. And in the case of the Mrs. Maisel poster, you see a TV show and a Yiddish word used to sell deli meat. You can also see an example of Yiddish and Yiddish words being used to sell a product in a recent trailer for a Jewish film festival in San Francisco.
Doffats.
Gesundheit.
Jukichi.
It does not mean bupkis!
Oh, what a mensch.
He takes a lot of chutzpah.
I just want to squeeze that little tuchus.
Jerry, don't be a schmuck.
Nudge. Klutz.
But
I think I've been pretty clear up to this point. I want the whole Megillah.
He wants the whole Megillah.
Oy vey.
Oy vey.
Oy vey.
Oy vey.
Like up the mountain or down the mountain?
It was flat.
It was flat.
It was a flat schlep.
Mazel tov, brother. Mazel tov. I'm getting a little verklempt.
So we see there in this commercial, the use of Yiddish words by characters that we are meant to believe are not Jewish, either based on their race. And of course, that is problematic because many Jews of color would see this and say, does that mean that I'm supposed to be the non-Jew using these words? And I use these words because I'm Jewish. So it's complicated, right? And that is reminiscent of these ads from 1967. You don't have to be Jewish to love Levy's Real Jewish Rye. And you see these are people who are either by their race or their profession, or there's also one of a white altar boy, are meant to be seen as not Jewish and enjoying this Jewish product. You get that also in this Hebrew National hot dog commercial from 1977.
Recently I converted to Hebrew National Kosher hot dogs. Improper? Not at all. My friends, there's no such thing as a religious hot dog. Hebrew National is a better hot dog. Unlike most hot dogs, it contains only pure fresh beef and natural flavorings. No meat byproducts, artificial coloring or fillers. It tastes absolutely divine. To me, anything less just wouldn't be kosher.
Okay, so they're commodifying the use of Yiddish, in this case Hebrew Yiddish kosher, the word kosher, to sell this product, and in the mouth of a clearly non-Jewish character. Then we have other interesting examples of commodification where T-shirts and other tchotchkes are sold that have Hebrew or Yiddish words, but sometimes with mistakes. You might be looking at that and wondering what Gitseim means. It's actually supposed to be Miyatseg, represent Brooklyn, and it was printed backwards. And this isn't necessarily the fault of the person who wrote it. Perhaps the printer made the error, but it happens a lot. In fact, just a few days ago, there was an article about a woman who was making face masks and saying New York City, NYC strong in multiple languages. And she tried to do it in Yiddish, which would be stark, but it came out backwards and it actually says crotch. Okay, I'm waiting for your laughter to die down, the laughter that I can't hear. So I just ordered my NYC crotch mask and I'm looking forward to wearing it around my Los Angeles neighborhood. So turning now to social networks. I have some survey data about social engagement between Jews and non-Jews and how it relates to language. So first, I'll just tell you a little bit about the survey. It was a survey I conducted in 2008 with Stephen Cohen. And one of the questions we asked, this was the one where we only gave 4 options, and that allowed us to categorize respondents. And you see we have 4,874 responses from non-Jews. And we can see to what extent they use certain Hebrew and Yiddish words. And we asked them if they've heard each word and if they use it, and if they use it when talking to just Jews or when talking to Jews and non-Jews. So we see that klutz, mazel tov, kvetch, mensch, schmutz, maven, and spiel are the most common words that we asked about, all words from Yiddish. And these words, well, some also Hebrew, and the word klutz is so commonly known and used when talking to Jews and non-Jews that it is not really seen as a Yiddish word. In fact, very few people said that they use it, but only when talking to Jews. The same is true with spiel. And I think some people see that as coming from German. It might have been influenced by German as well. Certainly the spelling, when people spell it S-P-I-E-L, is influenced by German. But interestingly, if you look at mensch and mazel tov, you'll see that the green line is shorter than some of the other green lines around there, meaning that they tend to use it more when talking just to Jews. And I think that's true, that a lot of non-Jews who have Jewish friends will use the words mazel tov and mensch when talking to their Jewish friends, but not when talking to others. Also, you'll notice that the words nu, macher, hamish, nachis, bashert, and kepi are not very commonly used. And that has to do with the fact that they are diminishing in use in the Jewish population and tend to be used more by older Jews. And then you see chas v'shalom, tachlis, davka, yofi, and balagan are words from Hebrew, also some influenced by Yiddish and Aramaic, that are hardly known by any non-Jews and used by really minuscule numbers. And this has to do with the fact that Yiddish is much more commonly used and known among non-Jews than Hebrew words, and Hebrew words are very important in Jewish communities as an in-group language kind of thing. And then when we look at some Yiddish constructions, we see some really high numbers. Enough already. People see that as just English and don't see it as influenced by Yiddish, genug schon. Money shmoney is also very commonly known, not as commonly used. And you can see some of these other expressions, the ones that are more common among Orthodox Jews, like, are you coming to us for dinner? And what do we learn out from this? Are very rare among non-Jews, although they say that they've heard them more than they've heard some of those Hebrew words. Some words have multiple meanings, and we asked about the word chutzpah in the 2 different senses, the positive sense and the negative sense, like we talked about before. And we found that Jews and non-Jews both know and use both of these in very high numbers. But interestingly, Jews are more likely to hear and to know and use the negative sense than the positive sense. You can see that these lines are bigger than these lines, right? But non-Jews are more likely to know and use the positive sense. This line is bigger than this line, and this line is bigger than this line. So that's interesting. That is an example of how a word is changing as it shifts from a Jewish communal word to a broader population word. And it also relates to how many Jewish friends they have. The more Jewish friends, this is just among, well, here you see that the blue is the Jews and the green is the non-Jews, and you see that the more Jewish friends both groups have, the more likely they are to use chutzpah in its negative sense, and that the differences are smaller among Jews and non-Jews, among people who have more Jewish friends. The word schmutz also follows this pattern of how many Jewish friends they have. The more Jewish friends they have, the more likely they are to know and use this word. And the few non-Jews who have all or almost all Jewish friends are more likely to use it, but only when talking to Jews. So that's another interesting thing, that if they have more Jewish friends, they're more likely to make that code switch and use certain words only when talking to Jews. Other factors that correlate with greater use of Jewish words among non-Jews, not just how many friends they have now who are Jewish, but how many of their close friends in high school who are Jewish, and the proportion of their current co-workers who are Jewish, whether they lived in New York as a child or adult, and the time that they spent in Israel. And the living in New York factor is very important because New York has so many Jews, and Jewish culture has influenced New York culture to such a great extent. So here's an example of the co-workers variable, that this is the percent of non-Jews who have heard the word macher according to how many of their co-workers are Jewish. Macher meaning a big shot. I know I haven't been translating the words, and if you don't know the words, that's okay, because it doesn't really matter what they mean. The point is that these are words from Yiddish that are used within English. And so you see, the more Jewish co-workers a non-Jew has, the more likely they are to know this word. Now, H.L. Mencken wrote a book in 1919 called The American Language, and it was filled with influences from Yiddish on English in America. And one of the words that he mentioned was the word mezuma. And mezuma actually comes from the Yiddish word mezumin, which comes from the Hebrew word mezuman, which is prepared. But in Yiddish, it means pocket change, like cash that's lying around, because it's cash that's prepared that you can use. And this word was very common among Yiddish speakers and became common in English in the early 1900s. And in 1916, he saw evidence that this word was used not only in New York, but also in Kansas. But this word is no longer used by most Americans, including Jews. And it is used, the word mezuman is used, mezuman, is used in a different context, meaning enough people to do a certain prayer, but is not used to mean change, pocket change, money, cash like that, as it used to. So this is an example of a Yiddish word that has disappeared from general American usage and from Jewish usage. And we also see evidence that some words in the survey are also diminishing in use. Here's the example of Hamish, meaning homie, that is diminishing in use. You see the younger age groups are much less likely to use this word than the older, and to know this word than the older age groups. But some words show a different pattern. This is the word schmutz by age, and the percentage of people who say that they use this word schmutz. And you see this weird curvilinear pattern, which suggests that this word schmutz became popular in the 1970s and 80s when these groups came of age. Schmutz meaning dirt. We also see the opposite trend in some cases. Younger non-Jews are more likely than older non-Jews to use the phrase money shmoney, which suggests that it has become more common recently and is not following the same pattern as a lot of Yiddish words, which are diminishing in use. So to sum up the survey data, we see that many American non-Jews know and use several Yiddish words to varying degrees. And we see the strong influence of social networks on the spread of those words. How many friends they have who are Jewish, coworkers, and whether they've lived in New York. We also see different historical trajectories for different words. Some words diminishing, some increasing, and some that were common in particular decades. So now we turn to the media. And I'm looking specifically at the New York Times, and I'm just going to give you a few examples of the many Yiddish words that have been used in the New York Times. 1965, they used the word maven. In 1978, they used the word kvetch. In 2000, not just the New York Times, but many media outlets used many Yiddish and Hebrew words. Why? Because Al Gore selected Joe Lieberman as his running mate. And and journalists had a field day with this, using words like shul, kvel, bar mitzvah, davening, minyan, eruv, and shomer Shabbos, often without even translating them. For example, Newsweek had this conventional wisdom section, and they had a special Veep chutzpah edition. Gore, gutsy goy, goes for the gold. Lieberman, scintillating Shabbos superstar. Buchanan picks a right-wing black woman as running mate in fractured party. Oy vey. So you see the use of Hebrew and Yiddish words that would be commonly known among non-Jews are used without translation in a general media outlet. And even just yesterday, the word verklempt was written in the New York Times. Usually when it's used in print like that, it's used in comedic ways or in quotes of other people. But in this case, it was used in just a description of a Republican governor having tears when speaking about a serious thing in a speech. Now, there was a study in 2003 of Yiddish words in newspapers, and the author found that Yiddish words were used not just in New York, but in many cities in the Northeast, in Denver, and in the South. And she compared words like maven to correlates in English like whiz, chutzpah to gal, and they're not exactly the same, but it's a good way to see how many words are used. She found that even in the South, many Yiddish words are used, but some words are more common in the North and in New York in particular than in the South, like schlep and chutzpah, for example. She also found that Atlanta, which had an influx of Jewish residents, had an increase in its use of some of its words, like maven, between 1991 and 2003. Now turning to pop culture, some Yiddish words and songs are popularized in film, music, theater, and comedy. And these cultural products are sometimes created by Jews, sometimes by non-Jews, usually by teams involving both Jews and non-Jews, but often they are performed by non-Jews. In 1930, there was a film called The Kibitzer, and it's about a Yiddish-speaking man who mostly speaks English in this film. There's very little actual Yiddish in this film, but the word kibitzer comes up, and even non-Jewish characters use the word kibitzer. And so by the time that film was made, that word must have been in popular use, but it was certainly further popularized by being the title of this movie. In 1932, James Cagney was a character in this film speaking Yiddish. I'm going to play an excerpt for you now.
Oi, geweld, was zit er mee met die? Ik zeg het. Een police naar China, man, uit China, geloof ik. Also, sie sagt, ich sage echt plain, mein Freund, Schändel, ich habe einen Bruder, er schleppt 10, ein 10 Doktor, ein Dentist. In Amerika sagt man ein Dentist. Was soll die nehmen, das versteht nicht. Ja, goyische Kopf, ein Wort verstehst du nicht. Ich sage der plain Mama waschen. In Florida will ich runterfahren nach Ellis Island. What are you trying to do, kid me? All that I can understand is Ellis Island. What about Ellis Island?
Wie willst du gehen?
Ich will runterfahren dann in Ellis Island. Mein Freund kommt mit 3 Kindern. Ein Fußler. Mein Nummer allein ist da gejost Levinovich. Ich muss beide gehen unter dem Ellis Island.
Ich verstehe. Du willst gehen zu Ellis Island, dabei bist du?
Was denn? Du bist ein jüdischer Junge.
Nun, wo ist denn das? Schau geht's. Hab's dich rein.
Nolan. What part of Ireland did your folks come from?
Delancey Street, thank you.
Okay, so you see the taxi driver, James Cagney, actually the actor was a Yiddish speaker because he grew up in a neighborhood where Yiddish was heard. So this kind of film introduces not just Yiddish words, but full stretches of Yiddish conversation to a broader population. This also can be seen in music. In 1932, there was a Yiddish theater production that included the song by Mir Bist Du Schön. 5 years later, it was picked up by the Andrews Sisters and became a very popular hit song.
And so I've racked my brain hoping to explain all the things that you do to me. By Mir Bist Du Schön, please let me explain. By Mir Bist Du Schön means you're great. By Mir Bist Du Schön, again I'll explain. It means you're the fairest in the land. I could say Bella, Bella.
Now, I recently learned that this song was also popular in Germany, and they assumed it was a German phrase. They wrote it schön, right? But then when it was found out that this was actually a Yiddish song initially, it was banned and there was an uproar about it. Paul Robeson is also famous for singing Yiddish songs. He got in touch with Yiddish culture in his work with the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee. And so for him, the use of Yiddish was not just a cultural phenomenon, but very political and very important. And I'm going to play a little excerpt of him singing a Yiddish song.
Damals wirst du gefeuert, was ist arm und was ist reich. Damals wirst du gefeuert, was ist arm und was ist reich.
Then, of course, Fiddler on the Roof came out in 1964 and the movie shortly after. And this introduced America to several Yiddish words, Hebrew words, l'chaim, mazel tov, shtetl, pogrom. And when high school productions and middle school productions of Fiddler on the Roof are put on, you have a lot of non-Jewish actors singing in, well, most of the songs are really translations into English, but singing about Jewish life, including some Yiddish words. In fact, Lin-Manuel Miranda famously performed the song L'chaim at his wedding. And this was a surprise for his bride. Here's how it went. It started out with his father-in-law, the bride's father, doing his speech. And then Lin-Manuel comes up and joins him, and here's what happens.
Well, we all want money, so here's to our prosperity.
To our health and happiness.
And most importantly, to life, l'chaim, 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 to life. Here's to the father I tried to be.
Here's to my bride to be. Drink l'chaim, to life, l'chaim, 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 life. Life has a way of confusing us,
blessing and bruising us.
Drink l'chaim to life.
And then the rest of the bridal part is
a glass and sip a drop of shots in honor of the great good luck that favors you. We know that when good.
Okay, so you have a bunch of people, some of whom might be Jewish, but most of whom are not, singing this phrase l'chaim. And then, of course, Saturday Night Live made a lot of Yiddish words very famous in the early 90s when Mike Myers, a non-Jewish actor married to a Jew, imitated his mother-in-law, Linda Richman, using a lot of Yiddish words. And here's Mike Myers in the blue, and Madonna and Roseanne Barr in this particular episode. Mike Myers, he uses a lot of Yiddish words, including I'm getting a little verklempt, and that actually is what popularized that word. That word wasn't known outside of Jewish circles before then, and then it became quite common enough that Obama used it when honoring Barbra Streisand, which is a beautiful connection because they idolize Barbra Streisand. Conan O'Brien did an episode about the word shul, or a sketch about the word shul, and Robin Williams in 2005, headlining a Shoah Foundation gala, he's famous for using a lot of Yiddish words, even though he's not Jewish. People see him as an honorary Jew. And so in 2005, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen," in a Yiddish accent, "welcome to Temple Beth Prada. This evening's meal will be milchadik, fleischadik, and sushidik." And then, of course, the Black Eyed Peas in 2009 had a song, "I Got a Feeling," and it includes the phrase Mazel Tov and the phrase L'chaim. In 2014, Stephen Colbert said to Mandy Patinkin, who is famously Jewish, "You've got, as my people say, a lovely little punim there." So that is interesting because he's using a Yiddish word directed to a Jew, but he is marking it as foreign to him as a non-Jew, ironically by saying, "as my people say." And this also happens in politicians' language. A great example is Al Gore's speech to the United Jewish Community's General Assembly in Atlanta in November 1999. I was there, I was in grad school at the time, and I found this so exciting. This really was relevant to my research on Jewish language. He said, for example, when the person who introduced him left the stage, he said, "We Tennessee Southern Baptists have a word for him. We call him a mensch." And highlighting his Southern accent and highlighting the fact that he is not Jewish, that he is a Tennessee Southern Baptist when using this Yiddish word. So he is using this word and marking it as not his own. And he used words like Bubby and Zadie and mitzvot. And he made a lot of jokes like the top 10 Jewish country Western hits. And one of them was, "The second time she said shalom, I knew she meant goodbye." And then he talked about the Jewish values of Torah, tzedek, and chesed. Now the word chesed, so Torah is, the Bible, tzedek is righteousness, justice, chesed is loving kindness, but he said chesed. And of course the audience snickered when he said that, and he said, "Did I pronounce that wrong?" And then he said, "Okay, wait, hesed, no, wait, chesed." And the audience just ate it up. They loved his mistake and his self-correction and the fact that he was pointing out how Jewish language is very different from the general American language that American non-Jews know. Now, we saw a very different reaction when Representative Michelle Bachmann mispronounced the word chutzpah.
Here's the big issue. The president doesn't want to have to be confronted with priorities and spending because he has a lot of chutzpah. He spent $1 trillion on the stimulus. It failed.
Chutzpah. Now, she got a lot of criticism for that. People said things like, well, shouldn't she maybe try talking to a Jew and then she'd know how Jewish language is pronounced? Clearly, she had only seen this word in print, and she saw this word as a word that is used to criticize your political opponents. She didn't use it quite right in terms of its meaning either. But we see another use of chutzpah by Ted Cruz in 2016. He and Trump were having a tussle about loans from banks, and Cruz said, for Trump to make this attack, to use a New York term, it's the height of chutzpah. Now, this was very interesting because he didn't say to use a Jewish term. He said to use a New York term. And that's another aspect of non-Jews using Jewish language is that sometimes the Jewishness of the terms is erased. Sometimes because they're just part of English, but sometimes because they're actually attributed to other languages. In fact, I saw one article about the Chutzpah Awards that this newspaper gave out that said it was a word from Chinese. But here, Cruz is using it, considering it a New York term, which some see as coded anti-Semitism, like a dog whistle kind of thing. But it's ironic because he is using it to criticize a New Yorker who is not Jewish. And so really a lot to talk about there. We could spend the rest of the time talking about that, but I want to move on to Cory Booker, who also uses many Hebrew and Yiddish words. He was the president of the L'chaim Society at Oxford, and when he was a Rhodes Scholar there, and he studied with Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, and he uses many Hebrew words and Yiddish words. But interestingly, he mispronounced one of them. He said Dvar Torah, Chesed, but he said Tzedakah instead of Tzedakah. Well, and this shows that it's hyper correcting, right? He knows that the ch sound is in a lot of Hebrew and Yiddish words, and he uses it even where it doesn't belong. And I've never seen anyone criticize him, whereas I certainly heard a lot of people read a lot of people criticize Ted Cruz and Michelle Bachmann for their use of the word chutzpah. And then famously, Bill Clinton, after the death of Yitzhak Rabin, said Shalom Chaver. And this was very well received. A beautiful, beautiful speech. I recommend watching it, but bring some Kleenex. So the reception of Hebrew and Yiddish words and mistakes depends on context and depends on political party. Given that most Jews in the United States are liberal and democratic leaning, Jews tend to be more receptive to the use of these words among Democrats than among Republicans, including their mistakes. Now, of course, Jewish politicians and culture makers and writers also use Hebrew and Yiddish. Bloomberg uses words like Meshugana, kibbutz, and shul. Andy Cohen has Mazel of the Day. And Jeffrey Tambor, I'll just play this really quick. At the Emmys, when the band started to play, he said,
Sheket bevakasha.
That one was kind of an insider language that most non-Jews wouldn't know. And you also see that here on Jimmy Kimmel, when a boy had a Jimmy Kimmel themed bar mitzvah, and Jimmy Kimmel honored him on the show, and then Jon Stewart came in and got really upset that he wasn't having a Jon Stewart themed bar mitzvah. And here's what happened.
Like, oh, that's nice. All right. That's very generous. You're a real mensch, as we say, right? Is that it, right? Well, thank you. Well, congratulations. Mazel tov to you. And
okay, so you see that Jimmy Kimmel is using some Yiddish words when talking to this bar mitzvah boy, but watch what Jon Stewart does here.
Don't be fooled. May I speak with him privately?
Go ahead, yes.
Sheket bevakasha! Did you get that, Will? Did you get that joke? Yeah. You know who didn't get that joke? Jimmy Kimmel! Because he's not a Jew!
Okay, so what we see here is that Yiddish is part of the broader American culture, but it's still associated with Jews. Hebrew is an insider Jewish language, even if it's sometimes used in the public domain. And finally, there is some use of Hebrew and Yiddish words among white nationalists, neo-Nazis, anti-Semites, using phrases like oy vey, it's like another Shoah. And that's this very offensive, mocking use of Yiddish and Hebrew words and New York style pronunciation, another instead of another. And the use of Trump imagery, you see the guy wearing the Make America Great hat again, and the phrase "the Goyim know" is sort of a reference to the protocols of the Elders of Zion, like, oh no, the non-Jews know what we Jewish conspirators are up to. We better stop doing what we're doing. And so these very disturbing phrases have become catchphrases among white nationalists. But to end on an up note, I want to finish by talking about Jew-adjacent non-Jews. An example of this is Shabbos Goyim, that is people who are not Jewish who help observant Jews to do things on the Sabbath. So, for example, Arvind Patel is a Hindu convenience store owner in a Queens neighborhood that has many Orthodox and Israeli Jews, and he has learned some Hebrew phrases like Baruch Hashem Yom Yom and Yom Tov Tieh Bari. And you know, have a good day and be healthy. And he says Jewish people is same like my family, mishpacha. So he is learning some Hebrew as he interacts with the Jews in his neighborhood. Some famous Shabbos Goyim include Elvis Presley, Harry Truman, Mario Cuomo, and Thurgood Marshall. And we don't know how much Hebrew and Yiddish they learned, but I imagine they learned a little bit as they did their tasks as Shabbos Goyim for their neighbors. And in fact, Colin Powell was not only a Shabbos Goy in the Bronx where he lived, but he also worked at a Jewish-owned furniture store as a teenager, and he learned Yiddish while working there. And then there are many non-Jews who work in Jewish-dominated industries or Jewish organizations who end up learning a lot of Hebrew and Yiddish words, or even Yiddish. This man, William Richard Harold Jr., is a pastor in Harlem, and he worked for many years as a volunteer driver for Hatzolah, the Orthodox Ambulance Corps, and he learned Yiddish as part of that job. And he showed off his Yiddish in a lot of Hasidic benefit galas. And for the non-Jews who work at these Jewish organizations and synagogues and kosher markets, some of the organizations hand out guidebooks to the non-Jews who work there, not only to teach about Jewish holidays and keeping kosher, but also to teach them some of the greetings that they'll need for the job, like Boker Tov and Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach. And of course, there is a whole research project to be done on the spouses and relatives of Jews who aren't Jewish themselves and aren't planning to convert, but are interested in the language and the culture and end up learning a lot of it themselves. I'm going to give the last word to Anna Mira and Jerry Stiller, who, playing the couple Mary Elizabeth Doyle and Hershey Horowitz, talk about how hard it is for the non-Jewish partner of a Jew to learn Jewish language. And Mary Elizabeth Doyle makes intentional mistakes, like the best meshugana ball soup in the world instead of matzo ball soup, and talk about going on their honeymoon in Israel, and they're going to live on a knish for a couple of weeks instead of a kibbutz. So it's not just politicians who make mistakes when they're using Jewish language, it's also the non-Jewish spouses of Jews. So in conclusion, non-Jews in the United States use Jewish language in many ways, in conversations with Jews, often marked as foreign or funny, sometimes mocking, but sometimes as their own and sometimes with changed meanings. And all of this indicates the diverse relationships that non-Jews have with Jews. And the presence of such words in the broader American lexicon demonstrates Jews' cultural influence on American society and also their social integration into American society. That's it. Thank you very much. Now I'm gonna stop the screen share, and I think we have a few minutes for questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. There's been questions spread out. We don't have the Q&A function like we do in your typical room, but I'm just going to ask if folks have questions to just put them in the chat, and we won't be able to get more than one or two, but we'll do our best to forward them to Sarah afterwards and try and get answers to you.
Okay, and let's let Ron unmute himself so that he can choose a question or two.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Ron. Great job, Sarah. And just to summarize the chat, people are really appreciating this a lot. So fantastic work. One thing that a couple of people brought up, including Lex and I think Phyllis Kurlander, was your study of use of Jewish words, whether there was any geographic data. Lex was asking if there's anything studying it in different parts of the world. And I think Phyllis was curious about whether your study was geographically centered anywhere. Right, so the survey of American Jewish language and identity had people from all around the country answer it. And so I haven't done that analysis comparing it by zip code because that's really complicated, but I have compared about whether they've lived in New York or not and did find a big difference there. And then in terms of people studying Yiddish, I don't know of any research about where people tend to study Yiddish, but certainly New York has the most options for studying Yiddish. But now with options increasing online, there are more and more opportunities for people to study Yiddish from their sofa. And Brian Mann, he just actually asked this again, was wondering if there's any advantage to maybe Yiddish going back to being an insider language. Is there anything lost when the words retreat from the non-Jewish sphere? Well, certainly the Yiddish language as a whole language is still very much an insider language, and Hasidim use it today as an insider language, and non-Orthodox Jews and non-Jews use it as an insider language among Yiddish enthusiasts who have learned Yiddish. But once words become part of the broader American lexicon, there's no getting them back, right? Yes, maybe something is lost by those words not being available for insider communication, but that function has really been replaced by Hebrew. And so in the book of mine that's coming out in just a few weeks, Hebrew Infusion, Language and Community at American Jewish Summer Camps, my co-authors and I really talk about how Hebrew has become that insider Jewish language, and that summer camps try to socialize campers to be interested in Hebrew, even if they aren't able to use full Hebrew sentences. When you were talking about Al Gore nominating Lieberman, Olivia Tucker pointed out that in a lot of the media examples you used, they didn't actually translate the words. And then I think it was Jessica I'm scribbling this down. Jessica Blucker, I think, followed up on that, whether that implies that they assume people could figure out from context, or if, I think Olivia's question was, does that imply that they assume that their readers know what those words mean? Right. Yeah, I think those that didn't translate assume that people would figure it out from context. But it was very interesting. In 2000, I had a field day just reading all these newspapers and magazines and seeing all of these uses of Yiddish. So I think we're out of time now, and I just want to thank Ron for moderating, thank all of you for attending, and especially to Lex and Dan for this marathon. You guys must be so exhausted. After this, I hope you'll get to take a nap.
I slept, but Lex has not slept. So
oh wow.
Lex, I don't know how he's vertical.
Well, right now his camera's off, so maybe he's not.
I don't know what he's doing. But Sarah, thank you. That was fantastic.